Welcome to the IAAP Nordic webinar on accessibility in mobile apps. It's clear that this is a hot topic. We have gotten loads of people registered from all over the world, from Australia to Singapore to Kenya to Brazil, to US and Canada, and of course Europe and the Nordic countries. I'm very happy that you're here today. So hi and welcome. My name is Malin Hammarberg. I'm a senior UX designer and accessibility expert, and I work at Funka Foundation, but I'm also a member of IAAP Nordic Chapter Advisory Council, and I will be your moderator today. Before we start, let me go through some housekeeping. This webinar is automatically captioned. You can use the CC function in Zoom. It's sometimes located under the More menu. Your camera and microphone has been disabled to avoid distraction. Sorry. If you would like to ask a question to the speakers, please use the Q&A function. And the chat will be monitored for technical issues only. If you prefer to ask your question verbally, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom. And today, we have a great panel with us. We have Björn Klockjung from Västra Götalandsregionen, who is a UX designer and accessibility expert. We have, I'm sorry, I lost my slide. No, can't read my notes. We have Eva-Jonna Ivis-Panula from I'm so sorry, I can't find your company, Eva. You have to say it later. Who is very nice and on a very short notice took Johannes' spot today because Johannes had some family matters that he had to attend to. So we're very glad to have talented Eva-Jonna with us. She works as an Android developer and will take the developer part. She was also accessibility specialist. And last but not least, we have Jan Japtegroot from the Abra company that works with accessible apps. He's also one of the founders behind app.org, the very good resource site with how to code and test with accessibility in mind for mobile apps in loads of languages. He will take the testing perspective in this webinar. I'm so glad to have all of you here, and without further ado, I will leave the word to Björn Klockjung.
Thank you. So my name is Björn, and I'm going to talk about accessibility in apps from a design or UX perspective, mostly. Now in the beginning, before all the questions and discussions, we just have a few minutes, so I'm gonna be a bit fast and just a few highlights or keys point I picked up along the way. And yeah, I think you said almost everything worth mentioning. I'm a user experience lead and a team lead at Region Västra Götaland, one of the regions in Sweden. We have 55,000 employees and 1.7 million citizens in the region that we work for. I think you can take next. Yeah. As I said, I just want to share some things I picked up along the way and more specifically learned while working on this app, the Migrän app, eller Migrän-appen in Swedish, that Malin is one of the original designers for. It's one of the first apps developed, designed, and supported from VGR. We are mostly buying stuff or procuring them. And we had accessibility focus from the beginning, I would say, and still have. So I'm going to talk a bit what I took away from this work and still learning from working with the Migrän app. So first, like takeaway or key point is that design or accessibility is designed. It's no longer enough for us designers to just design the visual experience. We need to design the non-visual experience. So how do we want it to work with keyboard navigation, with screen reader or voice control? We need to take a responsibility for the experience. that also learn how it works with screen readers and the technical possibilities. And we could start with, for example, here, start showing tab order and component grouping when we have a discussion with our developers how it should work. So which things should be grouped, in which order should they be accessed from a keyboard perspective or from a screen reader perspective, and what should the screen reader read? Have a control of that, because the accessibility is not something that randomly happens. It is designed and it's built. So I think that was a kind of a key takeaway for me when we have worked a lot with the Microing app. I think that's it. We can take next one. Let's start my timer. And also work with design systems to build in accessibility from the ground up, basically, or from the building stones that you design with and build with. So we at VGR and many other companies on the journey of creating design systems, everyone is, and we were doing that. We are doing that also. So it could start with guidelines for accessibility. It could start with checklists of how you build an accessible app or how you design accessibility, but also like start the smallest building stones like colors. So when we did a rebrand for VGR, we got new colors, and we did for all primary colors and all secondary colors, basically 10 tints, I think. And let's see if I find my notes. 10 tints. And we made this contrast map. This is one part of it that's visible now that shows you not only the color values, but also if you want to use text on it, should you use black or white text? And when is it okay to use both? So on the right-hand side, you have the darkest colors where it's okay using white text, and the left-hand side, you have the light colors that you need to use dark text. And we went a bit further. This is kind of in the system and a kind of it's like they all connected. So we have 10 tints here, and we have, if you take the darkest and you go 2 steps, you always know you're going to get a contrast value of 3:1. If you go 1 step further, you will have a contrast value of 4.5. And if you go even further, you will have a contrast value of 7.1. And this is the example for purple. So we have 10 tints of purple from 10, I guess 10, purple 10 to purple 99. And you can select any of the other colors and you will get the same contrast value. So if, for example, if you would take purple 10 and green 60, that would have the same contrast value in contrast to each other. It doesn't look good maybe, but it will have the contrast value. So this means that we not only, it's easy to get right, it's almost impossible to get wrong when you're designing, because you always know the contrast values, what you're going to get. You can take next. So I know JJ will have more about testing, so I'm going to be a bit brief here. And it's the kind of test small and test often. So instead of like waiting until a project is done or the app is, we have made the whole app is done now. And then you start testing from an accessibility point of view, that's going to make probably a amount of work for you. So you should test small and test often. So for example, every time you release a small feature, as part of the definition of done, test with screen reader, like how is the support, how does it work well? And the personal settings of the phone, does it increase the font size? Does it work with landscape and portrait mode? Does the dark mode work, the light mode work? And the kind of test with external keyboards. So and voice control, as it says here. So always test a little all the time. Could be developers, could be testers, but all, yes, so it doesn't amount of a huge amount of work in the end. I think that's, yeah, I think on the last, this was a bit faster than I planned. So my last thing is kind of a key point of what could be is essential for few, could be good for all, or is good for all. And so this is an example from the Migraine app. So on the left-hand side, we have a calendar. It's a calendar that's there to basically summarize for how many headaches you had during a month and how many medications you took. So in this example here, we have 3 purple circles. This is the headaches you have, the days with headaches. So they are 3. And we have 2 small rectangles that are green. And they are medication days, days you took medication. And this is what we want from a visual perspective. We want people to take away. Okay, this is the amount I had. Is it more or less than I otherwise have? Is there any patterns, for example? And the nice thing with this is when the screen reader gets here and it gets focused on the calendar, that's what the screen reader reads out. It says, basically, I summarize here with March 2024, 3 headaches and 2 medications, or medication days. So you don't need to go to every day and see if you had a headache and then try to summarize that in your head. You get the information directly. And this is a pattern I know, Malin, you used multiple times in the app, for example, for diagrams, where you have on the right-hand side, we have a diagram for when during the week you had your headaches. And the screen reader would say you have more headaches on Thursdays when you get there. And we was thinking is, why just use it for screen readers? This is good information for everyone. So now in these diagrams and many places in the app, you get these blue speech bubbles that says you have headaches on Wednesdays and Thursdays, or when you have a headache, it's very painful, for example. And this is good for people who are stressed, who have brain fatigue or brain fog because they have a migraine. Yeah, if you get a quick question from your doctor, when do you have mostly heavy headaches, you can quite easily answer that question. So that's like, find those patterns that probably is good for all, but you build them like they are essential for a few. I think that's mine time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Björn. Thank you, Björn. Then we leave over to the very talented Ivis, who will talk about mobile accessibility in mobile apps from a developer perspective.
Thank you. All right. So yes, hi, my name is Ivis Panula, and I'm senior Android developer and accessibility specialist, and I work at Aura. And I actually have background with web development, and I switched to Android development a couple of years ago. So I realized that I always keep comparing accessibility with what we have on the web world and what we have on Android. And that's actually something that I when I made the switch, I realized that one big problem with Android and like Android development and accessibility is that there is not that much information, because for web development, there is a lot of information out there, but for Android, not that much. I'm actually really happy that the situation has changed over these couple of years, and today you can actually find, well, not as much as for web, but already like a lot of usable information, so that like actually you can develop accessible Android apps, but also for like iOS and with cross-platform tools as well. So that's something that I've been really happy to see during the past years. When I started thinking about accessibility in mobile apps, and especially the developer perspective, one thing that always comes to my mind are the challenges, because I feel like many people say that accessibility on Android it's hard. Well, I talk a lot about Android development because I'm Android developer, so that's why I'm gonna refer to Android a lot. But many of these things that I say are actually like true for any mobile platform or like also cross-platform technologies. But like as I mentioned, I tend to think a lot about challenges when thinking about this, and there are actually some challenges that Android developers face when we are trying to develop more accessible Android apps. And why I have been going pretty deep into this topic is that I actually wrote my master's thesis around the topic. It was published just about a month ago, and the end result for that thesis was a Android accessibility checklist. And you're gonna get a link to that one if you're interested in checking it out. But in the thesis, in the theory part, I also went into these main challenges for Android developers, and even though I don't really have like data that this is true for other like platforms or like real research on that, I bet that it's true for example, iOS as well. But the main challenges that the research showed were first of all related to not knowing about accessibility or lack of awareness or little to no exposure or background with accessibility. So it's a lot about like a knowledge point. Then there is this point that companies are ignoring accessibility requirements. So it means that there is not actually time to use for Android or like developing like the features or app in an accessible way. So that's a big problem. Then one problem that the research showed is that accessibility is often about screen reader accessibility, while there are so many other aspects to it as well. And then there is this belief that accessibility has negative effects on the usability or aesthetics of the app. And then lack of tools is was a huge problem in the research. And then this thing that I also mentioned, that relevant and usable information is hard to find. But as I mentioned about this one, I'm happy that this situation has been changing during the past years already. And as for other things, especially for the first point about not knowing or like not having that much exposure to accessibility, I'm actually pretty happy that it's something that can be fixed, like with learning more and like understanding, for example, how disabled people use their phones and apps. So like I'm also a disabled person, so I can say that we have different ways of using our like devices or the apps that we are using. So learning about those things has already a big effect on accessibility of different apps, and also like it's sort of like, I don't want to use the word makes easier, but it helps with when developing applications and thinking about like how to actually bring accessibility in and where to start as well. Because as a developer, you don't always have the control over everything. You can start small, start from somewhere. And I think that's the best approach also with accessibility. So yeah. And as a sort of concluding thing, I could share like one example of this, I don't know, starting small, but also like the benefits or like, oh, there is a great word that I can't remember right now, but anyway, like we like, if you start somewhere, you can start, for example, testing how your app looks like with like bigger font sizes or dynamic font sizes. That can already like bring like show a lot of accessibility problems, and like fixing them. It helps, like, of course it helps with the accessibility related problems, but it can also help with things like localization, because if you localize your app to different languages that have long words, German, I'm thinking of you, that's something that where I've like noticed this, like when testing with bigger font sizes, the problems that also can like problems with localizations can be solved as well. So yeah, I think that was all I wanted to say at this point. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivis. Then I will leave the word to Jan-Jaap, who will talk about accessibility in mobile apps from a test perspective.
Yes, thanks. So some stuff was already mentioned about testing, so we'll go a little bit deeper into the guidelines and some ways of testing. So I was introduced already, just a little background. I studied software engineering, worked as Android and as iOS developer with native apps. I did a master in human computer interaction where I focused more on accessibility and usability. I'm the founder of Abra, where we do consulting for mobile accessibility and also developing software for automated testing. Also co-founder of App Foundation, where we mostly run the website apps.org. We just launched a new version on this Monday, where we now have open sourced all articles, and we have over 300 code samples for multiple programming frameworks. And lastly, I am now the Mobile Accessibility Task Force Facilitator at the W3C, where we are working on well, the guidelines for mobile accessibility. So I'm basically working with apps and mobile accessibility every day. So first, a little introduction to mobile accessibility testing. So for testing, you need to test against certain standards, certain guidelines. So for apps, this is mostly the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. So the image on the right is an overview of WCAG 2.2. It's the latest version, which was released in October last year. So we have 4 principles. One is perceivable. It's about making sure users can perceive the app in the senses they have. So if someone is blind, they need to perceive it in a different way, like with a screen reader. Or if someone is deaf, they might need captions for videos. Secondly, operable, making sure users can operate an app. So maybe someone is using a screen reader, using external keyboard, using voice control. There are certain checks you can do to make sure it also works for these users. And thirdly, understandable, making sure content can be understood by users. So it's a lot about error messages and trying to help users when they did not input something correctly, and also about making sure screen readers are using the right like speech-to-text engine. So you need to mark in which language the content is written. Lastly, robust. It's sort of about the sort of quality of your app. So in regards to apps, I would mostly focus on making sure it works on many different versions of Android and many different versions of iOS. And it's also about making sure that the versions of assistive technologies work. So like voiceover can be different in iOS 17 compared to 16. So it's good to check out that your apps work as intended with those technologies. Well, then the guideline itself, well, it's web. So that's an issue for apps, because apps are not the same as websites. If you can build an app, you cannot build a website in the same way around. So that's why you need to do some kind of mapping. So one technology you can use is WCAG to ICT. So there's currently a draft version of WCAG to ICT for the version 2.2 of WCAG, which will be published in a couple of weeks or months from now. The draft is already available, so this includes the new criteria, but it's still a little bit generic because it's focused on everything that's not a website. So apps are also not a website, but they have some specific requirements. So that's a little bit where the mobile accessibility task force comes in. And we are trying to map WCAG specifically to mobile devices. So also to Android and iOS. So that's what you can do. Also, you can follow the guidelines from the platforms themselves. So for iOS, we have the human interface guidelines from Apple. And on Android, we have the core app quality guidelines. And these guidelines share some requirements with WCAG, but they are also different in some of their requirements. So that's why for mobile, it can be a little bit difficult to see what I'm going to test against. Am I going to test against WCAG 2.2 or 2.1, or even in the US sometimes against 2.0? And am I going to exclude some success criteria or not? So for apps, yeah, it can be a little bit difficult to do this. And I hope in future we can have a little bit more clear guidance from the W3C, from the mobile task force. Yeah, next slide. Thanks. So then about testing. So how do you test against these requirements? First, I will cover shortly manual testing, then user testing, and lastly, a little bit about automated testing. So first, manual testing. I've listed a couple checkpoints you can check against. So contrast, you can take a screenshot, or if you have source code access, you can get the foreground color, background color, use a contrast calculator and check if it passes the requirements, which is 4.5 to 1 for a text and like 3 to 1 for other interactive elements. Captions is also an easy check you can do. Just check if there's a video in your app, check if it has captions. All videos need to have captions, and ideally also have audio description available. Third check is text scaling, to improve the text size of your phone. Then check if the text size also enlarges in the app. So for WCAG, its requirement is 200%, but there are users who have an even larger font size, like 300%, or even larger. So I would suggest to just use the largest font size available on your phone, but at least 200%. Orientation, also easy check. So a lot of apps only support portrait mode and don't support landscape mode. So yeah, just make sure you have unlocked your phone to support multiple orientations, and then rotate your device and check if the app adapts to this new orientation, and check if everything can still be used. And then you start to need use some tooling. So with a screen reader, so on Android, we have TalkBack. On iOS, we have VoiceOver built in the system. You can check for alt text. So you navigate to an image and check if the screen reader is announcing appropriate alternative text, or check if the image is decorative, that it's being skipped. Then for interactive elements like a button, we can check for the name. So I have a screenshot here, and it's showing DGA. It's a Dutch government app for identification. So it's showing in the captions of the screen reader, it's telling to my DGD. So that's the name of this element. Then it's saying button, which is the role of this element. It's also has a double role in this case. It's also saying it's a link. And it also has a hint, which is saying opens in external website. So it's telling me that if I activate this button, it will actually open externally. So this is some way to check a name role value. And I highly suggest to enable the caption panel on Android and iOS. It's available. So you can use it to show the exact text that's being provided by the operating system or by the developers. Lastly, focus order. Well, using a screen reader, you can also swipe around and see what happens in the focus order. Another tip I would like to give is voice control. So with voice control, you can enable labels, and they will display all the labels of interactive elements on the screen, making it a little bit easier to check if they are all valid. Lastly, external keyboard. It's a little bit because it's based on WCAG. So keyboards are not commonly used in apps, but there are people using them. And with external keyboard, you can check if there are any shortcuts that may be activated accidentally. You can also check the focus order and check if the focus appearance is clear. And sometimes you will find different behavior compared to the screen reader or other assistive technology. So I really suggest to also test with external keyboard. So on app.org, we have an article, and the link will be shared in the chat. Next slide, please. Thanks. So for user testing, I highly suggest to start testing with users, especially users with disabilities. But before doing this, please first improve accessibility of your app. So don't provide an inaccessible app and then have them test it. Please make improvements first as far as you can and then start testing. Try to recruit a diverse group of users. Also make sure to provide compensation. And there's multiple types of user testing you can do. So one of the easiest ways is the survey. You can even build in some kind of pop-up in your app to provide feedback, or you can do some kind of newsletter or email and get some users to fill in certain questions. You can even do in apps, you can detect if certain accessibility features are enabled. So we can check if someone has like a really large font size, check if someone has a landscape mode. We can do all kinds of checks, and based on those checks, you could show certain questions. Also, you can do an online meeting with users and get their feedback in this way. So it's a little bit easier to get this arranged. On-site testing, this is the best way to actually get users to a certain place and just watch how they're using your app, because in a video call or in a survey, you're not really seeing the full picture. And lastly, what you can also do is not ask users to come to your office, but actually visit users at their home. Because for some users, it may be very difficult to travel. So there's a video, it's from the Inclusive Design 24 conference. It's an interesting video about user testing. Then about automated testing. So I will cover 3 phases. So phase 1 is just to get started. So we have on Android, the Android Accessibility Scanner. It's a free app which can be downloaded from the Google Play Store. Using it, it's quite easy. You enable accessibility service. It shows some kind of check mark button floating in your app. You can press the button and it will scan for issues. So it will check for 14 types of issues. Checking, I don't have time to explain all of them now, but it's checking some common issues like touch target size. Is it easy for you to press items? It will check text scaling. It will check for contrast issues. And it will also check for like overlapping items, and it will do a couple more checks. And then on iOS, we have the Xcode Accessibility Inspector. So if you have a MacBook, you can download Xcode for free. And it comes with the Accessibility Inspector, and you just select your phone, select an app. You can also hit a button and it will perform automated accessibility check. And this is doing 7 checks. So also contrast, hit region, text that's overlapping, traits that are missing. So traits are like the rules, like button, and dynamic type is text scaling. So it shows a list of issues. It also shows a screenshot. So it's kind of easy way to get started. And then for the second phase, you can implement the code in your app to do the checks, not from your phone, but actually in the code in your automated testing. So for Android, we have the accessibility test framework for Android. It's provided open source by Google. It's not really well known. It's also a little bit difficult to get started, but it's actually the same framework that's powering the accessibility scanner app. So it's doing exactly the same checks, but you have a little bit more options here. So you have to first build some kind of hierarchy and then select the checks you want to run. And then it will basically return an array of check results, and you can, based on those checks, fill your testing suite or do some kind of logic, whatever you like. Then on iOS, by the way, this is available since KitKat, so Android 4.4. Then iOS 17, we have the new XC UI accessibility audit. It's an extension for XC UI testing, and you can perform an accessibility audit for a certain amount of test cases. It will return a list of issues, and you can also process those issues as you like. So this is more automated way to do some checks in your app. And then phase 3, I would say, is more about working together with your team, because these tools I mentioned, they are just local results. So you have to add them yourself to maybe a Jira or some ticketing system, or share like screenshots with people. So there are some tools out there where you can build your own, where you can store the results in a dashboard or in a database and show them in a dashboard and basically collaborate better with a team. So some of the vendors are Abra, which I'm building. DQ also has solutions, Evinst also, and there's some other available as well. So there's also an article on apt, which shows a list of all free tools that I know of, and also a list of all sort of paid tools that I know of. So if you have any tools which are not listed, yeah, please let us know so we can add more of these tooling. So my conclusion is it's quite easy to get started with the accessibility scanner or the Xcode inspector, but because of the different kinds of guidelines, it's quite hard to get it right. And I would just say, yeah, progress over perfection. So just get started, make your first fixes, and yeah, don't go from 0 to 100 in one go. Just yeah, start making some improvements. So that's it.
Yeah, I'll try to close the sharing. I'm not sure how to do it. Stop share. Peter can fix it, I think. Okay, yes, one clarification, I think, something that was missed from the standards. We have a European standard called EN 301-549, which actually have a section about mobile applications. So it contains some of the VCAG requirements and then some extra requirements. And these IAAP EU are actually working on trying to make these extra requirements easier to test for. And in the last Paris event, we had a workshop where we, with several accessibility experts, we were talking about about the accessibility. Peter, can you please make me stop sharing, because I don't know how to do it. I can't, nothing happens. So, and then we can welcome all the other participants as well. So that was just some extra information for the participants in the webinar. So when I tried to set this webinar up together, I had a hard time finding developers that want to talk about accessibility. And I found it kind of funny because I know they were working with accessible apps, but they said, oh, I don't know that much, or I'm not sure anyone wants to listen to me. Why do you think that accessibility in mobile apps are like such a hard thing to talk about? Who wants to answer this fuzzy question? Is it John Yap, maybe?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't speak for everyone, but I think if you compare to websites, there's just a lot more tools available to sort of validate if you are on the right path. So with Chrome, you can just install like Lighthouse and do a check, and you get a score like, oh, you're 90% on accessibility, or 100, and you get even some fireworks. But for apps, we don't really have this, and I think that's maybe what I like is sort of the game feeling, maybe a little bit, where you sort of fix these issues and get sort of satisfaction from seeing the number or percentage increase. And then when you're at 100, you can be sometimes overconfident by thinking you've solved all issues, but automatic tests only find like a small subset.
Yeah.
But still, I think maybe that's something that helps people to feel proud of the progress they've made.
Eva, do you have any thoughts about this? You were so nice to just jump into this 2 days in advance.
Yeah, I personally, I've been talking about accessibility so much, so I'm ready to dive in if I'm asked. But I also it might be this feeling generally that many developers might have, that I don't know about this topic so much. It happens outside accessibility as well, because we sort of also often live with people who know the same things, or work with people who know the same things, and then we don't see how much we actually know, and then the feeling of I don't know that much, so why anybody would want to listen to me? That can happen too. So that might be one reason.
Yeah. And I know, Björn, you had been working with loads of developers that know accessibility, but they are all kind of shy from talking about it.
Yeah, and also I think been lucky in that sense, at least for us, there are so many people knowing about accessibility in apps, because I think that's kind of an issue. Also, people don't think even should, or they don't know that apps also have the requirements that websites are.
Yeah.
So,
I got a question here where one participant asked if it's possible to inspect the code in an app like you do on the web. Who wants to answer that one? Jan-Jaap, maybe?
Yeah, I guess Eva also maybe from Android perspective, but in general, if you download an app from the App Store or Play Store, so you're not having source code access, then you are not able to inspect the source code, sort of like a black box. You can still access sort of the accessibility layer, and with like the accessibility scanner and the Xcode accessibility inspector, you can still identify some properties, but a lot of things like the font size and the exact color code that are being used and the font weight, like is it bold text or is it just like semi-bold or almost bold? So those are some things that we cannot do compared to websites. But if you have the source code, of course you can, but usually when you're doing an audit, external company, you don't get source code access. So it's harder.
That's one of the hardest things, I think, when we look at the requirements. The one about robust code. What's the 411 that's removed from VCOG, but still actually visible in the EN standard, since the EN standard next version will be released 2025, and it's not in that standard, but it's in the current one. So we talked a bit about which requirements you kind of web accessibility guidelines, and we have requirements set on them, and how should a tester or a designer or a developer think to kind of translate the web guidelines we know very well to app guidelines? Eva, can I start to answer if she wants to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And like, because there are these sites that, okay, like we have these standards, we have some like baseline to follow, especially in cases where accessibility is related to legal issues. So there is some sort of like threshold you need to pass so that your app is legally accessible in a sense. So there is that one. And then like when there are no clear ones for like mobile app accessibility, it's always a bit of like well, it's hard, and like that's maybe one of the things that I found hard on like mobile side, because as mentioned on web it's pretty clear. Well, it's not always clear, but like the standards and like those things are clear because they've made for the web. So yeah, but like I don't like the standards in a sense that because in many cases, both in web and Android world, that there is the problem that if we have these standards, then like often companies think that, okay, we just need to pass this like one line and then like that's it. And so like I would love to get to a point where we didn't need to sort of care about them and we just made accessible apps. But I also know that that's like not really a like realistic thing.
Yeah, I know, Jan-Jaap, you and me talked about this earlier, and you have done some really good translation of how, for instance, using the title of a page, because every screen in an app has a title. So you've done all these kind of translations on your app.org site, right?
Yeah. So on apt we have like an interpretation. It's not like it's the interpretation. We have like our interpretation of how we would map these criteria to apps. And we're now trying to do this more officially through the W3C with the Mobile Accessibility Task Force, where we just have a group of experts. So we now have around 20 people that are just discussing for each success criteria, like how would we map this to an app, and is this even possible, or should it be excluded? So we're trying to make a more general consensus from a larger group of experts to make some kind of guidance for how we would actually test this, because it's still like Yves mentioned, more for the legal reasons. You want to make sure is something actually, does it pass this requirement or not? And that's still quite difficult to say, because if you follow the app guidance, it's not official. It's like just one way of interpreting it. So it's still quite difficult to know if you actually pass it or not, and how someone gets sued, like who's gonna check which way is it accessible or not. So it's a big challenge. And I guess, like you mentioned, in Europe with the EN 301-549, we even have a whole chapter dedicated to software. So apps are part of this chapter, and even has additional requirements, like you mentioned, like most companies are not even testing in Europe against these requirements, and it's not even clear what exactly do they include. Like it's saying something about user preference, so maybe if user has like a dark mode enabled, should the app include this? And it's also mentioning stuff like font type. So if the user prefers maybe to use a Comic Sans, should your app also support this font type? And if there's also a bold font type setting, which we know from app statistics is around 10% of users actually have bold text enabled, should we also have this as a requirement in apps? So it's still not clear. So I think that's the big problem with apps. It's not really clear what the requirements are and how to. It's not even clear what the requirements are, but then secondly, it's like, how do we test for the requirements? So it's.
And I got a specific question here. How do you evaluate the 1-4-12, the text spacing criterion? I know this is not really possible in apps, but I'll let you, who wants to answer it? Anyone feeling really happy about it?
I can start with just how we did it for just text spacing in line height for, I think it was an article. We know in the design that the text spacing was enough, and we needed to validate it in the app. We just tried to kind of visually measure it. Does it look similar? So we didn't have a hard number on it. We just tried to visually see it, if it was enough.
Yeah, maybe I can add, I believe last week or 2 weeks ago, we actually discussed this specific success criterion and the Mobile Accessibility Task Force, and our consensus so far is mostly that it's not really applicable to apps. If you look at the way it's written or intended, the users cannot adjust the text spacing on their Android or iOS device, at least at this moment. So maybe in the future they will. So that's why it's maybe even more important, like, for designers to do the checks themselves, because users cannot modify them. So it still applies in some way, but not as web.
Yeah. I got a really good question here. I asked a lot about logical navigation order, specifically in mobile app. If the menu, which is often tabs, is at the bottom of the screen, should it be accessed first or should it be accessed last? I think I'll ask Björn to answer this one.
Yeah, I'll see if I can answer. I don't know if I have the correct answer. We always start left hand from the top, and it's in the last part. And there's, from a screen reader perspective, there's multiple ways to navigate. As you know, you could do tab, but you can also just scan with your finger, which we also test, and then you can access it that way. But I don't know if that's the correct answer, but that's how we do most of our apps.
And do Eva or Jan-Jaap want to say something more? I know with the screen reader, we noticed a really fun thing, not fun, but during a user test, we saw that one of the guys using a screen reader couldn't find all the objects on the screen. And we had tested with several other users that was using screen readers as screen reader users. But this guy had no vision, and he used the one what he were going over the screen with the finger. So it was very important for him that the object were all over the screen. So the click area was the entire touch area was the entire screen, because otherwise he couldn't find them if we had too much spacing on the side. That was a very interesting thing we found during user testing and screen readers and navigation, I would say. Another interesting question here, voice control has been mentioned a few times during this webinar. I used it sometimes for visualizing the programmatic labels in the screenshots, but I haven't found that it really uncovers issues that the screen reader testing doesn't already catch. Have you found out otherwise? Or are the situation where you uncovered an issue with voice control that you missed with screen reader testing? Who wants to answer this one?
I think that's all Bjorn also, but for me, I wouldn't say it catches new issues, but it can be a little bit easier to check maybe the label in name requirements. You can check if the text that's displayed visually also matches the name that's programmatically set. So you can use the label that's shown to activate it using voice control. So I guess that's a little bit easier to check compared to screen reader, because with screen reader you can check which name the screen reader uses compared to what's shown visually. But not really any, at least in my experience, not really any new issues, just a little bit easier to find some label issues.
Björn, do you have anything?
Yeah, we found issues, and I think this is mostly Android, if I remember correctly, where we had no problem with screen readers or keyboard navigation, but from a voice control perspective, it didn't pick up it as an interactive object at all, so you didn't get any labels. So we have found some of those issues with voice control, and where it just doesn't pick up on the interactivity or at all. So yeah, some issues, and I think mostly Android, if I remember correctly.
I also got a question here. What's the most common accessibility issue you find within an app? Should Eva answer that one first? We can take it all three if you think of the most common accessibility issue.
That's a really good question. I think like I actually need to think a bit. So if the others have an answer first.
I've tested loads of apps. For me, one of the most common things is that objects are not named correctly, or that the fonts, for some reason, aren't dynamic, actually speaking. And I think both of them are really important, because loads of people changes the font size in their phones. Can't remember the correct numbers, but I think Jan had them.
Yeah, so name would be 4.1.2, name role value. I guess it depends for me how you count. Like some issues can be multiple times on a screen, like interactive name role value. You can have maybe 100 issues on a same single screen. But if you compare this to like 1.3.4 orientation, it's just one check for the whole screen. So if you count in amount of issues, it's different. So I would say like landscape mode, it's very little apps that support it. So, and also from App Foundation, we also have a hotline where people can report inaccessible apps. And the number one issue is also unlabeled elements. So images missing alt text, or just buttons missing names. Or a lot of times there's like apps that have pin code, custom keyboard for pin code, and it's just saying button, 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 and not saying the number. So that's very common that names are not set.
Let's see. One very quick question that's very specific to Migraine app, and they asked if what user you were testing with, what types of disabilities did they have except from migraine?
test a lot with visual disabilities, so like people using screen readers or low vision. That's the most common, and we can do it quite regularly. And we have tested with people with cognitive disabilities like learning disabilities, autism. Yeah, I think that summarizes it quite well. And screen reader is something we test often, as I said. Just not like ourselves, but we have people working the team that is using screen reader on a daily basis, for example.
Okay, so before I wrap this up, what's your best tip for the people listening here today to get started with accessibility in mobile apps? Should we start backwards? So we start with the testing part then. So Björn, who looked like he was thinking, can think some more.
Yeah, difficult to say one tip, but I would say just get started and start with some simple checks, and especially start learning the screen reader, because it really is needed to test a lot of issues. So if you learn it, you can find a lot of issues that really affect users.
Eva, or Evie, sorry, I keep calling you different names all the time.
It's okay. I could continue from there that if screen reader feels a bit intimidating, then you can also start with, for example, testing the font sizes, because that also like reveals a lot of accessibility problems, especially with the like layouts. And then from that, it's then maybe easier to move to the screen reader because you've started already with something.
And from the developer part, what would you say? Best
well,
tip?
That actually would be that one, because like when you start seeing these problems, and especially with the for example, the larger font sizes, when you start seeing the problems, because most apps have some problems where things don't fit in their containers, for example, so they clip or like behave pretty funnily, then like learning how to fix those issues, that's actually a really good starting point, and like then continuing from there to other things. So that's probably like one tip that I could give.
And Björn, about the design then, very shortly, because
I can just say exactly the same as the other participants. Just start trying to test out yourself, testing with screen readers, or just getting started with everything. I think that's don't be afraid of it. Just start trying to test, because it just gets easier to test when you're used to it. So.
And let's see. Here it is. Ooh. Okay, so this was not the slide we were supposed to be on. I'm so sorry. I'm on the last one there. Okay, so before we wrap up, I just want to do some advertisements for IAAP EU's 2 upcoming events next week. On the 22nd of May at 4 p.m. they have a drop-in session. A drop-in session is when it's a very informal meeting where everybody can join and ask all the questions they want about IAAP membership or certifications. We have this time 3 panelists, one from Germany named Johanna Steiner, one from Finland named Sanna Kramsi, and then we have from Italy Simona Bariselli. And so join if you have any questions about IAAP, you can just join and add. It's usually a very nice conversation. And then the next day, on Thursday, the 23rd of May at 3 p.m., we have a webinar about document accessibility. It's, sorry, I lost my notes. I'm so sorry here. Okay, so the webinar is about, they will discuss automatic testing, PDF standardization, and how to make document accessibility less cumbersome. We have a great lineup of experts. It's Jane Black from Crawford Technology, Marcus Erle from Access4, and my colleague, Peter Kemmage from Funka Foundation. So if you want to join any of these, Peter will add, my colleague Peter will add the links to the chat so you can get into them. I would like to thank you panelists. You were excellent. I would love to do this like weekly, so maybe we can start just making people more aware about accessibility in apps. And I'm so glad that you took your time and shared your knowledge. And if we have any outstanding questions, we will answer them in email after this, where we collect all the links that we have had in the chat and also the presentation if someone wants that. Thank you so much for today.